Good afternoon, everyone. Hear me in the back row? Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Baker. I'm from the Coast Guard here in Woods Hole. I'm just going to serve as the moderator for this afternoon's discussion. Just a couple of very basic ground rules that we're looking for. We're going to have some kind of opening remarks from all of the speakers that we have up front. We'll introduce in a moment. Then we'll open it up for questions. And we just ask if you have a question, just get up from your seat and kind of queue up behind one of the microphones on either side of the room, and I'll call on a question one at a time, and we can get an answer from the panel up front. That way we can, one speaker at a time is the objective. Let me just introduce who we have here. In the middle of the table here, Captain Richard Schultz is the sector commander, captain of the port here for the Coast Guard in southeastern New England with our office here in Woods Hole. To his left is Dr. Christopher Reddy from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Mr. Jamie Gonzalez from the Massachusetts DEP, and Mr. John Mendes from Massachusetts Marine Fisheries. And last and certainly not least, down on the end is Ensign Nathan Mendes from the Coast Guard here in Woods Hole as well. And is this Chuck joining us right in the nick of time from the Town of Falmouth Harbor Master's Office, Chuck Wilkinson. All right, Martinson, I'm sorry. My apologies, sir. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Reddy.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of our president and director, Mark Abbott, here at Woods Oceanographic Institution, and Captain Schultz, we welcome you here to Redfield Auditorium to give you a brief about this recent oil release with support from Woods Hole Sea Grant. I study oil spills, do it all the time around the world, and so it's unfortunate it happened here, but it's also fortunate to be able to help and work with this great team. We're really lucky as well as to get a lot of stakeholders here in the response phase to help you answer some questions. It's often frustrating, but not knowing all the answers and things like this, but it's great to have these folks here, and it's not easy, especially since they've been working around the clock as well during this response. Before I introduce Captain Schultz, I just want to tell you that I've been on site at a lot of spills, and I see a lot of oil spills. I've seen a lot of people in Gumby suits and Tyvek suits. The level of professionalism and activity and means to respond to this spill has been outstanding. The response, which is going on right now, is to make a bad thing from getting worse. That's what an oil spill response is. And these folks have made this bad thing from getting worse. So at this point, I'm just going to pass off to Captain Schultz.
Great, thanks, Chris. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Rich Schultz. I am the sector commander here at Sector Southeastern New England, right across the road here in Woods Hole, where our main office is. And just a little background on Sector Southeastern New England is the area of responsibility that I'm in charge of here is all Coast Guard operations for Cape Cod, the islands, and all of Rhode Island, which basically is from Manamet Point all the way to the Rhode Island, Connecticut border and, out 200 miles offshore. So, a large area of responsibility, and this, spill right here in Woods Hole, here in Great Harbor is obviously right here in our backyard. So one of the responsibilities that the Coast Guard has, or one of our 11 missions, is marine environmental protection, marine environmental response. And with that, one of my authorities as the sector commander, as the captain of the port for this zone, also is as the federal on-scene coordinator, which means I'm the lead federal representative for pollution response in the coastal and maritime zone. And I don't think a lot of people, you don't hear the Coast Guard being necessarily involved or in charge of pollution incidents, oil spills, hazardous material spills, but that is one of our main missions. And you certainly don't see this every day here in Woods Hole. So with that, my crew, my staff has been intimately involved with this spill from the start. And a real quick, background, since Chris was mentioning a couple of things in regards to, his history with oil spill studies and oil spill responses. My whole career actually has been emergency pollution response, natural disaster response, and pretty much have been involved in every major oil spill, chemical spill, and natural disaster since I've been in the Coast Guard the last 24 years. So, this is sort of my bailiwick, if you will, when it comes to responding to pollution incidents. And what I'd like to be able to do is have some of my staff that's been most involved and most intimate with this particular response really brief everybody here on the situation, on what's transpired since Sunday afternoon, and where we intend to go with continuing to respond to this oil spill. And at the same time, it is a unified effort here in regards to making sure that we get back to normal, if you will, working with state DEP, Mass DEP, as well as our other partners here that are in the room. So, local partners and local agencies and the like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the microphone over to Ensign Mendes, who has been, one of my go-to guys for responding to this incident. So, Nate.
Thank you, Captain. Good afternoon, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to take part in this, and thank you for all your interest in this incident and support. As you can see here, we've got an overview of Great Harbor. I'm sure most of you know Great Harbor better than any of us, but just to give a little bit of a backdrop, the initial notification came into the Coast Guard at around 1:13 p.m. on Sunday, the 21st, and that call came from a concerned citizen, a good Samaritan, as we like to call it, just on the docks over by the aquarium, and noticed something wasn't right with the water, and took a closer look and found a significant sheen in the area. Immediately called Station Woods Hole, which is co-located with our sector, and they in turn pointed them in the right direction, sent them to our command center. Command center took a detailed brief, and then had that party contact the National Response Center, which we'll get to in a minute, that contact information, where all emergency response, oil spills, chemical spills, security breaches, all those calls should be filtered into the National Response Center. And as I said, we'll get to that in a little bit. From that call, the National Response Center took, again, another detailed report, asked very specific questions, and then quickly they make mass notifications to the federal government, other Coast Guard agents, other Coast Guard units, state agencies. Mass DEP was notified. They notify local port partners in the area, and from that point, that call came through. Shortly thereafter, maybe 1:30, that notification went out, and that's when everything started ramping up on Sunday. Our response petty officers did a great job of deploying to their primary unit, which is on Base Cape Cod, up in Bourne. Made their way quickly and safely down to Woods Hole, and they were met on scene with Mass DEP representatives that you see here, the Falmouth Harbor Master, and shortly thereafter, representatives from CETO. So at that point, when our responders get on scene, obviously their safety, not knowing the product that's in the water, how dangerous it is, the primary concern for them is their own safety and the safety of the public in the area. So trying to determine in a safe manner what the material is, where it's coming from, and the extent of the damage is their thought process when they get on scene. So they were quickly able to determine what the product was, where it was within Great Harbor, which is not exactly, I mean, when you're just a few people, it's not exactly the smallest body of water to cover. So they covered a little bit of ground, try to figure out the source of the spill, and they were not able to determine that. There was no known source or known responsible party, is what we call it, in the area at the time. So quickly, not seeing a source that they could secure, which would be their next step, they moved into containment, which is our secondary after safety. Containment and securing of the source is our next step. So they worked with CETO and Clean Harbors and the Harbor Masters to deploy what we call hard boom, containment boom. Some of you might have seen that bright orange boom in Great Harbor. Initially on Sunday, if any of you made your way down there, it was kind of a wide, we spread kind of what we call a wide net to contain it, because daylight was kind of wandering at that point, and the sheen was dark, so it's kind of hard to identify where it begins and where it ends, and the last thing you want to do is cut the sheen in half and then the other half's drifting off somewhere and it's not controlled and not contained. So they spread a wide net to keep that sheen in the containment area, which was the right thing to do. And weather was working to our advantage as it continues to do throughout this entire process. It sort of it ended up tucking as daylight wandered. It tucked that sheen. As you can see, in that blue dot would be, I don't have a pointer on me, but the blue dot right there would be, okay, all right, shield your eyes. All right, so the blue dot right here is the aquarium. This area right here is where the majority of what we call recoverable product was washed up. So daylight came and went, and Monday morning is when we got on scene to, I don't know what to do with this thing now. When we wanted to make our assessment of the extent of the damage to the shoreline. We came in and, actually we can go to the next slide, Chris, if you don't mind. So that's the initial containment area. This is actually a slide we got from Chuck. As you can see, a wide net, the aquarium's there. So we came in and we moved that into, I'm gonna go to my stick again here. I apologize. All right, so we moved the containment area and the containment boom from this area to here, which is where it's been until earlier today. So we had a really good grasp on where that sheen had washed up. Now, the majority of the sheen, because the tidal cycle that afternoon, early afternoon, had came and went, and the majority of that sheen from the wind and the tides had left it on the rocks. Now, I think if you skip ahead, we could show what the rocks look like right there. So you can see that really dark line is what you saw on Monday morning. And the majority of the recoverable product was on the rocks. Some of it was in blotchy patches, closer to the shoreline, water too shallow to use skimmers, which is a mechanical device that we use to sort of get that oil off of the surface of the water and separate it from the water. A little too shallow to use any mechanical recovery process. So we use what we call sorbent boom in snares, some of that white boom that you've seen in the area. That's sorbent boom. That doesn't retain any water, but anything petroleum-based would adhere to that boom. And so what we did along that shoreline, we tripled up that sorbent boom, and we had a very stiff wind pointing in that direction, just northwest rather of the aquarium. Perfect. All right, that's much better. Okay, so we can go back to that initial slide. So right there. Okay. All right, so this is what was the area. This right here was the area that was majority of the recoverable product was either on the rocks or in the really shallow water, where unfortunately a lot of the waterfowl were washed up due to the weather and just sort of hanging out in that nook to take shelter. And that's where we believe the majority of the waterfowl were exposed at some point. On Sunday, a lot of them were exposed, and throughout the night, probably Sunday night, some of them would come and go. So from there, the tide and the wind kind of aided our efforts. The next morning we came in, and Petty Officer Longhorn and I, our primary response petty officer, were on scene. And I hate to use the analogy, but it was like night and day. The rocks, I don't know who's been down there recently, but the product that we believe to be in the water is lubricating oil, and it was rather easily removed from Mother Nature onto that sorbent material and drastically reduced the amount of product that we have in the water right now. So from there, we replaced some of that sorbent material, sort of rinse, wash, and repeat that cycle, and a very unintrusive way of recovering that product. And it seemed to work rather rapidly and rather effectively. So at this point, this morning, we've moved off that hard boom and relocated it to surround this pier. I'm sorry for the mic, but and kind of let some of that unrecoverable product, that light sheening that you can't remove from the water manually, weather and naturally dissipate. And there's some remaining product in the rocks that we're still working to remove. And as you can see, as some of you may know, that we had a high amount of waterfowl that were impacted potentially from this oil spill. 23 was the latest number that we had tallied up, which is a pretty high number for the amount of product that we had in the water. But our plan and our way forward is to remove the residual oil that's in the rocks and on the shoreline that I alluded to earlier. And the point that I want to highlight here, two things. So the response that, not to pat ourselves in the back or anything, but just the response from the Good Samaritan, that's what we want, a timely response, and from there, the dominoes start to fall. Our response petty officers got on scene in a routine fashion, and as they would with any emergency, and did the right thing. They contained the oil spill, try to mitigate that impact, and then remove the product in a safe and efficient manner, which is what they did with the help of Clean Harbors and CETO. And the direction we're moving in is to get, like I said, get those residual oil out of there and try to determine the responsible party. And one thing I want to go over, if we can go to the very last slide, I know I have a couple, is reporting. That's one of the areas of deficiency. Actually, this notification that we received is actually a good example of the notification process and how it works. Like I said, one of your colleagues here didn't call this number, but he did call the Coast Guard, and there was actually another individual who made a similar call to the fire department and then called the Coast Guard. So we have some pamphlets in the back that we want you to kind of, if there's anything that we can have, the citizens or our port partners here come away with, is knowing that we do handle oil spills. That is. I talked to some people this week, and they're like, I didn't know the Coast Guard. A lot of people, they're like, we didn't know the Coast Guard did oil spills. Well, we do, and those calls are filtered in through the National Response Center. So if you could document that number, and if you see something, as they say something, and those are the two numbers to call for any emergency in the area. The second number being our command center. So any marine-related emergency and oil spill would be called into that number or the NRC. So I don't really have anything else to add. Sir, if you want. Yep.
Next up, Jamie Gonzalez from Mass DEP.
I'd like to echo Nathan's congratulations, I guess, for doing a great job for putting this all together. We train with the Coast Guard and with other parties, with fire departments, to respond to these type of spills on a regular basis. And I think the response is, from what we experienced this week was kind of a testament to that training that we all put together and that we participate in. I think the cooperation between the feds and the state and the local community and the organizations has been a big help in moving forward and not only documenting the release, but also the cleanup, all the way from notification through to where we are now and moving forward. One of the things I would like to say as far as the notification point, the notification through the Coast Guard and through the NRC is great. Another avenue to also report if you have not only a marine or a land-based spill, you can also call MEMA, and they will dispatch to to DEP, and that number is 888-304-1133. So if you want to, if you have any spills of oil or hazardous materials, or you notice something, please don't hesitate to call. We have on-call responders available 24 hours a day, and that's just what we do. That's all we take care of is emergency response. We deal with these kinds of situations on a daily basis. So as far as the cleanup goes, I think it's gone really well. The amount of materials that's been used and the amount of oil, although we don't know the quantity, I think what we're seeing is the actual environment is helping with the cleanup. It's dissipating through evaporation and through absorption onto the absorbent material that we've used. So I think that's that's what it's all designed for. So from that perspective, I think everything is kind of worked out the way it's planned. I know from a public perspective, it may not happen as quickly as some people would like, but unfortunately, that's kind of how the process works from our perspective. These things take time, and they are best sometimes left to just letting the materials do their job. So other than that, I don't really have a whole lot unless there's some questions.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Chuck Martinson, would you like to speak to the wildlife impact, sir?
Hi, Chuck Martinson, Deputy Director of Marine and Environment for the town of Falmouth. Thanks so much for coming down here. Total recovered animals are 23 birds at this point. I do want to caution everyone in this room that obviously we can't say that they are or are not all related to that oil spill. There are certainly some animals that did have product on them. The animals through my office have been documented, photographed, and we're currently in the process of cataloging each one, identifying each one for hopeful later use in other venues. But again, there are some animals that might not have been, or they could have all been. We don't know, so I don't want to kind of push to say that all of those are specifically from that event. We obviously just came off a very rough cold spell, as everyone knows, which was hard on wildlife anyways. We have, through both our department, representatives with the Coast Guard, Clean Harbors, DEP, we've got together and we have physically walked the area, about every inch of beach, rock, between Falmouth Harbor all the way over to Gansett, checking the shoreline for any additional animals. We really wanted to go that extra mile to be able to go ahead and quantify anything that would have been affected through this spill. In addition to that, immediately after I was notified, I was able to be in touch with our area biologist, John Mendez from the Division of Marine Fisheries, who was critical in assisting with the shellfish needs of our community as well. In addition to addressing our bird needs, our bird concerns, our avian concerns, certainly our shellfish concerns are of equal importance to us, and we have been keeping an eye on those shellfish flats, particularly the ones on Penzance Point. I think that's about all I have at this point. I'd be happy to take any questions as we proceed on further. Thank you.
I just have a quick comment. If any scoters that you might have found around Gansett were already dead before the oil spill.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, if we could get in touch afterward, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
All right, any last comments from any of the panel members up front before we open the floor to questions?
Yeah, Matt. Excuse me. Yeah, Matt, thanks. And I just wanted to introduce a couple other members of my team before I forget, especially if that way, folks that might have questions can understand some of the other experts that we have in the room. Another critical member of the Coast Guard's team during any oil spill is our NOAA Scientific Support Coordinator. And our scientific support coordinator that I've worked with probably for about the last 15 years in various places that I've been stationed in the Coast Guard is Mr. Steve Lehman, who came down here this morning from Lowell to make sure that he was with us for this meeting. And he was contacted day one. That's one of the part of our process is we always contact our scientific support coordinator to talk about what type of oil it could be, if we know what type of oil it is, how does that oil respond to weather conditions, tidal conditions, the environment that it's in, and any particular weather that might be coming, and where and how that oil might travel. So Steve is a critical part of when we respond to any type of pollution incident. And at the same time, Nate mentioned our Marine Safety Detachment, which is right up here on Base Cape Cod, and that's where our pollution responders reside for the sector. And so we have some of those folks with us today. I've got my Marine Safety Detachment Supervisor, Lieutenant Spencer is here, and then of course some of the some of the petty officers that responded. Our lead petty officer, response petty officer, MST1, Lawhorn. So critical to making sure that that our response to this incident goes as well as I expect it to go. That's it, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, Captain. Okay, so if anyone has questions, we'll just invite you on down to one of the microphones and we'll answer them. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Kojanu. I'm a resident of Woods Hole. I would like to tell you about how I spent my last Sunday. I was walking with my son in the morning at 9 a.m. I walked by the fisheries dock and I noticed a lot of oil on the ramp. And then I noticed this big tugboat by the name Ocean King, which I have photographs of. I actually walked over to the boat and talked to the crew, and I asked whether they know where this oil comes from. And they said, "Oh, don't you worry, it's just vegetable oil from our hydraulic system." And I just walked over to the ramp. Oh, by the way, anyone wants to see these photos, I made them available to the press and also to anyone interested. And immediately after that, I walked over, and so this is 9:30 a.m., right? And I made a call to, not knowing this number, I called 911, which put me in touch with the Falmouth Fire Department. And, well, they asked me about the location and all that. I gave them my number, everything, and they asked me whether the oil was black. And I said, yeah, it looked pretty black to me. And then I walked home. And by 10:20 a.m., I received a call from the Coast Guard, and they were confused. For some reason, they thought that I was the boat owner. So I'm sorry to say, but it's something that doesn't quite make sense when you say you received a call at 1:20, when somebody from the Coast Guard actually called me at 10 a.m. And that's something for whoever leads this investigation to clarify.
Hey, what time did you say you called 911?
Around 9:30.
Okay.
So, and those are all recorded calls.
Yeah.
You can get back to it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So to me, it's like, we actually walked back there around 2 a.m. and there was nothing happening. The boat was gone. Ocean King was gone by then. And then there were like birds swimming and diving in oil. Okay? By that time, the tide went down and the oil was exposed on the rocks there. And then we called again. Actually, my wife Elise called the Mass DEP and left a message there. And on the way back home, maybe 5-10 minutes later, we saw a truck going by from DEP. This is what I know. Okay, so if you could please clarify some of this. Sure. And
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you.
Is on? Okay. No, thank you, Dan, for sharing that. And I think a lot of that is come to light as of the last couple of days. Received multiple calls. I think the call that you got, maybe the pass down that the fire department gave, wasn't as detailed as what we normally would get from the NRC. And some of the personnel we have in the command center followed up on that. I'm not sure if the message that they got was clear. There clearly was a miscommunication. They did send people on scene to follow up on the report that you had passed. And as I said, some sort of miscommunication. There wasn't any oil in the area that these individuals were sent to. I believe it was some state individuals and Coast Guard individuals. So Nothing
Excuse
more.
me. So you actually sent someone there?
Absolutely.
After-
Somebody
and
was
then-
somebody was on scene. To my knowledge, I talked to the command center about it this morning, and so your report was taken to heart.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there was some sort of miscommunication, and then concurrently, I know you said you came down to the beach at, you said 2 a.m., but you're talking about 2 in
2
the
p.m.
afternoon, probably 2
2
p.m. So at that point, we had been notified from a second individual. Not
Okay.
ideal, not what we want, but kind of that's kind of concurrent with the timeline that we were given. 1300, we got a call in to the station, or 1 p.m. got a call from the station, and then the wheels start turning. The NRC gets notified, the mass notifications go out, and they try to correlate the two. Yeah, that will be looked into, but
So you are saying that you actually sent a team there and they couldn't see anything?
not,
Or they may have been sent
to a different location.
Oh.
So where they ended up, there wasn't any oil in the water, and they did a sweep, and by time before they found the sheen that you were talking about, a second report came in, and with a specific area, as I kind of showed in my slideshow, it was pretty tucked into a pretty tight corner at that point, by the aquarium and the boat ramp. So unless you're at that exact spot, you probably wouldn't be able to see that sheen from far away. So it was nothing more than a miscommunication. We do appreciate you calling. Obviously, not having the knowledge to call the NRC, you did the right thing and you called 911, and we appreciate that. Nothing more than a miscommunication beyond that point, and it was rectified later with another Good Samaritan that kind of called, and was to no fault of your own. But we do appreciate that call, and it was taken seriously and was investigated. But like I said, nothing
Well,
more
it's
than a
just fun, you didn't even mention it in your presentation earlier. But.
Well, I just talked to you beforehand, and I didn't really get the whole story of the timeline. And prior to this, like I said, we had talked to the command center and trying to find out if those two reports were correlating or not. Because right now we're dealing with a response. We do have notifications, so that's kind of what we do, sort of at a hot wash towards the end, where we find out, okay, so what are some of the things we can iron out? Did this initial report that we got earlier that we looked into, did it correlate? That's why I gave you a call earlier today, trying to track that down and iron that out, because we're sort of on the back end of the response effort. But like I said, moving from there, it goes safety, containment, and recovery. And that's kind of what we're in right now, and
Sure.
we were going to try to iron those things out. That's why I reached out to you earlier today to try to iron that out. But I do appreciate your attempt to
Thank you.
contact us, and all the information that you have is going to be useful moving forward in the investigation, though. Thank you.
I do want to comment real quick on, as Nate just finished up saying, investigation. So I do also have my my lead investigating officer here today, Lieutenant Corinne Plummer, over here is in the corner. And before you leave today, you need to talk with, you two need to get connected. So please make sure you do so, because we are very interested in the tugboat that you mentioned. And as part of our investigation into this oil spill, we do want to find out who the responsible party is, because they do need to pay for the cleanup, and they do need to pay for any impacts that have incurred. And part of what our job is, besides responding and cleanup, is that conducting the investigation. And we've collected oil spill samples from various locations of the spill. We've collected samples from several boats that were in the area. And those samples get sent to the Coast Guard's Marine Safety Laboratory in Groton, Connecticut. And as soon as we get the results back from those samples, then we'll be able to see where that leads in the course of our investigation.
Any further questions?
I have one.
Yes, please.
You referenced some impacts on shellfish. Could you elaborate a little bit about that? And Chris, maybe you could also say something about the kind of oil it was and how long it'll last in the environment.
Chuck, would you like to expand on the shellfish question?
Sure. Chuck Martinson again, Shellfish Constable. I'm also joined by John Mendez from the Division of Marine Fisheries as well, who's our area biologist from the state. At this point, the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries has closed down the area to shellfishing. And obviously, we're over there daily, almost hourly at this point, keeping a close eye on it so that there's no shellfish removed. The second piece to it is that there are obviously aquaculture farms that are over there. We have been in touch with the individual farmers who are growing in that area. And as far as their farms are concerned, I'm confident with the decisions that they have come to with our advice. The actions that were taken by the individual farms are sufficient for the health of the shellfish on their farms. I don't know if John wants to add to that. As far as just not to cut you off here, John, but from a resource perspective, we're going to be linking back up with the Division of Marine Fisheries in the coming weeks to determine when areas can be opened up. Obviously, the division has their own set of standards which they adhere to, which is a national standard, and I think John could maybe speak about that a little bit more.
Okay, yes, my name is John Mendes with Division of Marine Fisheries. Like Chuck said, I'm the area biologist. And what we're going to do now is stay as closely as possible with DEP, Chuck, and the Coast Guard to determine exactly when this place will be safe to harvest the shellfish. Public health also will have a say in this. At that time, we'll probably continue the closure for 7 to 10 days, just as a buffer to make sure everything is safe. And then we will reclassify the area to what it was, and we'll be back home.
So,
I have a comment. Can I do it from up here, or do you want me down there?
We can hear you loud and clear, ma'am. Go ahead.
So the area that was affected, right by the Allentown dock there, by the landing, is an area where I've been poking around for years, almost daily, with an empty bucket. So I know what's in there. And the water quality and the substrate in the past few years in particular have really been declining. And I noticed that this past summer and the summer before, a sheen on the water a lot, to the point where when I go out on the floating dock cart, I don't want to put my net in the water there, or get a bucket full of water to put stuff in. And I don't know, where it's coming from or what regulations might be in place that aren't being followed by whoever it is causing the sheen. Is it from every boat that gets launched and pulled up? Is it from the large boats, the fishing boats, and whoever else gets to tie up there? I don't know. So I don't have a specific question. I have a vague question that if you didn't understand what it was, I can try to ask it better.
I think Mr. Mendes has an answer for you.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of. I sort of have an answer, but no, thank you. So in the future, if you do see a sheen, I know we've got the nice graphic behind me with the notification number. I can give you, if you don't want to, give a detailed report like to an emergency hotline, you can call. I can give you my card later, and you can call. We can come down and take a look. I work right by across from the ferry terminal, so and we can kind of try to figure out where it's coming from and work from there. But yeah, in the future, if you do see anything, not to beat a dead horse, but definitely, definitely bring us in the loop. Whether if it's an emergency, this number. If it's something that just doesn't look right, you can call me directly. I can get your information after, and we can figure it out.
Awesome.
Okay.
Just one other thing to what you're saying. The Division of Marine Fisheries realizes a lot of use in that area, marine, recreational. And so we have a permanent shellfish closure that runs from the Steamship Authority all the way down to that last pier ramp for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all cool little stuff that, planktonic things, stuff that's living in the substrate and on the docks. I mean, that cool stuff is like a real important part of the whole marine picture of surface levels and stuff. Okay, so.
After we are done, I'd like to give you my card. I am the area biologist, so you could contact me 24/7, and I'd be more than happy to run down and take a look at whatever you see.
All right, thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
do you want me to answer?
I'm sorry, Chris. Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, to answer the first question up there, it's entirely possible, besides all the marine activity released in that sheen, the National Research Council did a significant study, and most of the oil that enters the coastal environment is from roads. So it's entirely possible, especially since we're so close to land, that it's mostly, it could be just as much as all those folks parking right next there as well. So
Dang trucks driving right out on the dump.
I have no comment on that, but I will tell you that it's entirely possible that it could be four wheels and not a rudder. So we'll keep that in mind. Back to Stephanie Murphy's question, which was about the composition of the oil. My lab collected a sample early Monday morning, was able to communicate the bulk understanding of what the properties were so that they could help the responders make the most well-informed decisions. And so we collected samples around 9 o'clock and dropped everything in our lab and was able to give some insights to the Coast Guard and other folks by about 1 o'clock. You know, I don't want to get too much into the details, but I would say this is a mixture of underway fuel that the vessel would use to power its engines and lubricating oil, with most of it being predominantly more lubricating oil. One key point here, though, is that the black that most folks are seeing are small manganese and iron oxides. So it's not oil per se, it's little pieces of rust and probably the wear products. And we've analyzed all those little black particles as well. So, and then about long-term, short-term for oil spills, it's always really hard. You know, you have to be really careful. I've seen folks say, we dodged a bullet, and the next day there's a lot of dead animals in some places. And I've seen the flip side where folks think it's absolutely terrible, and Mother Nature and the responders do an excellent job. My gut feeling is that I think the responders did an excellent job, and the damages are going to be minimal, and the long-term impacts are going to be minimal. Oh, and one last thing. That vessel, there was absolutely no vegetable oil. We analyzed for vegetable oil.
Do we have a question over here?
Gregory Dolan, Woods Hole resident. The harbor opens to the south, but the entrance to Penzance is very narrow, confined place to the north. Is there any natural seepage, or is that not matter because it's already part of the scope? Did you go around that side and look at the northern side of the scope, east side?
You're talking about seepage through on the outside of
From
the.
the yacht club through, or anything like, is there any, did it flow to the north side, or is it outside of the harbor?
Outside of Great Harbor.
On the Sunny Beach side, on the northern side?
No, our initial patrols. You went out there in the small boat with the group, people from our MSD. Did you see anything at that time?
We did not. As I had said, in addition to searching for the waterfowl, we also looked along the shoreline for any evidence of product, even on the Buzzards Bay side. Yeah, we actually went beyond Stony Beach. We went all the way up to the small Gansett Beach. You can, right at the end of the roadway there, I forget the address it's across from, extending that far north, or that far, west.
My name's Dr. Russell Brown. I work for NOAA Fisheries in Woods Hole. I park right up next to the Boons where they are now. I'm a resident of East Falmouth. I was going to ask questions about shellfish. Thank you for answering those. Excellent answers. A comment and then maybe a plea. The comment is, I think the response was excellent. And I do think we dodged a bullet. I think this could have been far worse than it was. And I'm really impressed with the Coast Guard, with DEP, with Clean Harbors, with everybody else who was involved in the response. So from my standpoint, congratulations. The plea is, let's find the responsible party. And anybody who has information that might help with that, your name is, I'm sorry. Lieutenant Plummer, yeah. Please talk to her because this is important. There was damage. The damage, frankly, is a lot more minimal than it would have been if we didn't have trained professionals dealing with it. So thank you.
And Lieutenant, we can have those calls filtered in through the command center if you'd like, if anyone has anything to add, and they can get you to the right person.
Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Eric Matson. I'm a oyster farmer, grow Chippewa oysters out in the harbor. I just wanted to thank Cito, Chuck, John for making some quick decisions on the day of the spill and the day after the spill. We were able to move, 2.5 tons of oysters out of the area ahead of the sheen. If it wasn't for that quick decision making and the help of Cito, Cape and Islands, we wouldn't have been able to do that this time of year. I saw the spill on Sunday at about 1 o'clock, and it looked like a disaster. 3 days later, I can barely tell that it happened. So I'm very hopeful, like Russ said, that we dodged a bullet. I'm glad to hear from Chris that he agrees, since he's an expert. And I just want to say thank you for that. I'd like to stay in touch because I'm not going to sell oysters that I wouldn't eat or feed to my family or friends. So if we can stay in touch, John, before I bring the oysters back into the harbor, I would appreciate that. So again, congratulations to everybody on your response. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you anticipate finding any more birds that have oil on them that are alive, and what's the plan on the pathway for those birds?
So in case you didn't hear, do we anticipate finding any more birds that are oiled? And if we do find one, whether it's deceased or alive, it's probably good information to get out. What should residents or anyone that finds one do?
Sure, absolutely. If there is an animal that's found, while there is a setup crew working still down in the Woods Hole area at the ramp, probably the best bet would be if you could notify that crew, and they will reach out directly to myself, and I'll assign an officer to respond immediately. Second off, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have not found any birds that were alive at this point. They're all deceased for various reasons. Certainly, if we do find any birds that are alive, we do have 2 staff members on our crew who both worked for Cape Wildlife. They're extremely well-trained and versed in working with animals that have been not only oiled, but in a number of different conditions. We also would like to see those animals because we can derive a sample from the animals, the oil off those animals. So it's important that we're able to get them, maybe get some samples off them immediately, and then go ahead and rehab them. So if anyone does see that outside of that time, if you call the police department, and you can let them know if they want to page one of our officers, one of the Marine and Environmental Service officers, all of our staff will be on hand, and the on-call person can respond at any point for that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Philip Hernandez, Woods Hole resident. Understanding that oil spills and their cleanup are, understanding that oil spills and their cleanup for them are really variable. Can you give us kind of a long-term, kind of what you see the long-term impact on the local ecology to be?
Oh, the question is, what is the long-term impact on the environment going to be? And all eyes are on Steve Lehman for this answer.
I'm sorry for that. I mean, I think there's clearly been, you have 23 birds that have been, you have 23 birds that have been impacted one way or another. It may be that some of those died from other reasons, but there's clearly been some impact. Now, what that means in terms of the population, it's probably pretty small numbers. So I suspect that, at least in my 30 years of doing this around the world, the resiliency in an environment like this is pretty remarkable. So I think you'll find that the long term, and long term meaning the next 6 months to a year, it's going to be pretty minor. They're in pretty short order. There are going to be very few people that can find traces of oil there. Chris is one of them, but Chris has got $1 million worth of equipment in his hands. So it's a
more like 3, but it's not like I count my kickballs.
So you'll be able to find it at small levels, but the question is it continuing to do damage, and that on a spill this size, this localized, I think the recovery is going to be pretty quick.
Yes, sir.
Bob Conroy from Falmouth. If this was a commercial vessel that might have caused this, does the Coast Guard or Homeland Security monitor the AIS automatic identification systems that most commercial vessels broadcast all the time? That would let them know where boats are in the area. A log of those boats that pass through our area would be convenient if you did have them.
You want to take that, or I can take it?
The answer to the question was.
All of us could probably take
Yeah,
it. So.
there's a system, AIS, Automatic Identification System. So commercial vessels are required to broadcast kind of a radio beacon that says, this is who I am and this is where I am. And this information is publicly available. And so the question was, if this was a commercial vessel, couldn't we, the Coast Guard, as part of our investigation, go back and look at the AIS tracks of any vessels in the area? And the answer to your question, sir, is yes. AIS tracks are one of the things that our investigators are looking into as part of their investigation. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. We know of the tug. It's called the Ocean King, and I did track it on Marine Tracker. And after it left Woods Hole, it went on its way up to Harwich. I was just thinking, like, if the Coast Guard knew in the morning that it was the Ocean King, could somebody have checked on this boat to make sure it wasn't dumping oil the entire way up to Harwich? And after it left Harwich, then it went to Rhode Island, where we found out that it went to be repaired.
So at this time, we've got a lot of leads in the investigation, and you're all kind of building into the leads that we already have, okay? So believe me, we know, of the Ocean King, we know where it was, where it's been, where it is now, and part of our investigation before we can conclude that they are the responsible party is the match of any oil samples that we took. So there's a lot that leads into it, and we do know that they are one of the vessels that we're looking into.
I'll give this back. I just wanted to say social media is an amazing thing because we've got a modest Instagram following on our Oyster page, and immediately we had industry feedback from other tug captains and whatnot. So if you truly need help with your investigation, we've got photos and
I'll say that we monitor social media pretty intently as well, not just in the investigation phase of things, but in search and rescue cases, and
also food pictures,
and all kinds of and all of the incidents and situations that the Coast Guard responds to. Social media now, of course, is a part of that.
Thank you.
I don't think I need a microphone. How do we keep these irresponsible boat owners out of our harbor?
Well, in some cases, it could be, if heavy fines don't deter them from doing so, then we also have the possibility of suspending their master's licenses and mate's licenses and the like. So there's a lot of it, a lot that goes into it. But one of the biggest deterrents, really is the fact that folks are out walking the docks, not just the Coast Guard, but anybody, the community. Agencies, and that's what the Coast Guard does do every day, but we can't be everywhere all the time, of course. So a lot of it is just local deterrence, and noticing and calling people out on it. I hate to say sometimes, monetary fines aren't what is the impetus to make people stop, doing things they shouldn't be doing. So, there's various levels of fines, there's various ways that the Coast Guard can do things, but that doesn't necessarily equal somebody not breaking the law. Steve, please.
Yeah, I mean, the other comment you were making is how do we know that it wasn't spilling oil all the way up the shoreline? One of the advantages of a fairly populated and trafficked area is that we see that oil pretty well. And when you're offshore, these guys go offshore sometimes and have releases, either intentional or otherwise, that are long ways from what we can see. And in the last number of years, we've gotten really quite good at spotting that by satellite. We've retasked satellites. Well, I didn't retask it. They're looking at other things, but as part of what they're looking at, the algorithms and the analysts that are looking at that are much better skilled now at identifying what looks like oil. And so we get a notification that says, this might be something you want to take a look at. And we'll try and figure out the false positives, and is it really possible that it's oil? There's a lot of ways to do that. And if it is, then, you know, Coast Guard sends an airplane out to take a look at it. And these are relatively small amounts of oil that can be released. And if the conditions are right, usually calm conditions, you can see a small amount of oil a long ways away. And there have been substantial fines on large shippers that have come as a result of that. So there's you know, it's not a perfect system, but there are a lot of eyes out there. The tough thing about oil is it doesn't go away right away. You spill oil, it stays on the surface and it sheens, and it makes this really, really thin, but really, really big footprint. And it's, you know, you can't sneak around and do it anymore.
Yes, sir. Here, let me run up there.
Sorry, kind of with regard to the same subject, we saw a great presentation about the natural dissipation outside of Fukushima that was here a few months ago, and I think Chris mentioned natural dissipation of this particular stuff. How long will this particular stuff take to go away, so to speak, from this site?
I think you might be hard pressed to find much of the fossil material or the underway lubricating oil and the whatever other oil product that was released. You might see some of this rust maybe here and there. You know, we often rely heavily on nature, but microbes are like teenagers. They do their jobs when they want and at their own speed and things like that. Not always complete the job, but I think in this case, I feel pretty comfortable that nature is going to make this go away, and you'll be hard-pressed to find much of any evidence of this release, especially considering that there is a background signal as well, and so it's starting to disentangle an already pre-stressed and pre-oiled area. Yes. Microbes are finicky and fickle.
I'm just curious, is there any impact on fish, the fish population? Or any issues around eating fish caught in the area over, say, the next 6 months?
So the question is on the safety of eating any fish from this area.
We don't typically see finfish, particularly a spill of this size, we don't see finfish impacted that way. First of all, the oils on the surface, they're moving through the area as opposed to where's my oyster farm? Opposed to the oysters, which are stuck. They don't get to move. So it's really big spills. It's an issue, but on this, I don't think that's something to worry about.
I would just add the exposure field. In order for a fish to be oiled, it has to see the oil, and it has to go through it, and it has to go through it in a time long enough for it to actually allow the biochemistry to allow it to happen. In this case, I find it hard to believe that there would be an event of an exposure to finfish.
We also process it differently.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of other things. But I think really in reality, it actually had us to be in contact at a level that would be appreciably impacting, and I don't think it happened.
Adding to that comment, the Division of Marine Fisheries is close to shellfish, not for finfish. If we felt that it was affecting the fish, it would have been closed on that also.
Any remaining questions from the audience? Yes.
My name is Andrew Nelson, and as a lifelong Vineyard resident, I find anything bad that happens to Woods Hole also offensive to our sensibilities over there. But I'm here on behalf of Congressman Keating, and I would just like to extend our thanks to you guys for doing such a bang-up job getting all this done. And if there's anything that we can do to assist you going forward with any assets or anything that you would need federally, please don't feel any hesitation to reach out to us.
Okay, if there are any remaining questions, last call. If you think of anything afterwards, we're going to stick around for a while, but I turn to the panel for any closing comments. Chris, Dr. Reddy, Captain Schultz?
I can't leave without any closing comments. So, no, I mean, really, I just want to thank, Jamie and Chuck and John and Nate and Chris and Steve and everybody that that was here today to answer your questions, to get us all caught up to speed on where we are with regards to the spill response itself, and then just what we can expect down the road. So I just thank you guys for all being here. Chris, thanks again for setting this up. And as Matt mentioned, we'll stick around here for a little while longer, and if you have any other questions, you can certainly ask. If you think of something later on, I believe our numbers are posted around here in a couple different places, and obviously we can also offer up any business cards if folks are interested. So thanks for coming out, and it truly is good to see this level of interest in a situation here that we're dealing with as a community, and thanks for continuing to monitor the environment yourselves, and just like Nate said, you see something out there that that doesn't look right, and certainly anything like oil or chemicals on the water, please report it to the Coast Guard, report it to our local command center here, or the National Response Center, the number that Nate had posted up there. Still up there, and we greatly appreciate it. So thanks for having us here today.